Loyalty. It's the holy grail for marketers, a deeper form of engagement in this age of fractured media and diffused attention. The Pacific Northwest's propensity for community building may readily engender this deeper form of relationship. Think RAI, Powell's Books, or even your local farmers market. We'll speak to two visionaries on how they've successfully built loyalty around their brands. Then we'll consider whether there's something in the water here in the region. Why do we have such strong communities of fans? What are the larger lessons in how we grab someone's attention and create a relationship for life? I'm Hanson Hossain. Welcome to Four Peaks. In every way, Shauna Causey stands on the peak of community. She's the incoming president of Social Media Club Seattle and guides Nordstrom's social media strategy. She's also recognized as one of the region's top 100 women in technology. How does she use these online tools to build such powerful communities? Shauna, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, well, listen, you've had an incredible career. You've worked for amazing organizations like the Mariners, Comcast, Fox, Nordstrom. What does loyalty mean to you in that context?
Yeah, I feel like I've been really lucky in my career to work for such great companies, and it's always kept me here in Seattle. And your question makes me think back to my first job at the Seattle Mariners, and it was that idea, they really ingrained in us that idea of people might not remember everything that happens at the ballpark when they come that day, but they will remember how you felt when you were there. And I think that that's just a common sentiment that we hear over and over again, but it really came to life at the Mariners, and it's this idea of how do you care about your customers and make the experience great.
So that's interesting. So you're looking primarily at emotion. So let's take the Mariners, for example. Do you need to extract that universal emotion that you're going to use to appeal to your fans? I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah, I think it's looking at all the programs that you're doing and all the way down to who you're hiring, but figuring out how do you care about the customer or your constituent as best you can and show them that you care and make it a great experience. So you're right on the emotion side. It's really important.
So are the emotions specific to the particular brand? Like for the Mariners, for example, what emotion would you be looking at there?
Well, the Mariners are really targeted at families, so making it a great family experience. So in every way, from the food to how you greet people to if something happens at the ballpark, if you spill coffee on your shirt, that you can get a new shirt at customer service,
wow.
a new T-shirt. So it's really all these sort of surprise and delight things that are built into your experience.
I imagine because they're a sports team and a beloved sports team, the Mariners were kind of an easy start. Are there more challenging organizations or brands that you have to work a little harder to get that?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And Comcast was definitely a challenge. I worked there for almost 8 years, and there were many different ways that we were trying to show customers that we cared in an environment that was sometimes tough with all of the different business problems and challenges.
People love to hate Comcast.
The sector, it's a tough place to be because when you're trying to serve that many people with that many different services.
And there's no choice either, so they think they're sort of Comcast is being forced upon them, right?
Well, there are other choices, but you're right. Like there are fewer choices and bigger companies that are providing services like satellite. And it's one of those services that you don't have any appetite for it going down. If it doesn't work, we have a problem, So you have to always be on. You have to have great customer service. You have to show that you care about the customer. You have to just be there for them 24/7.
And does that actually turn things around? Can people actually love Comcast?
Frank Eliason was one of my coworkers when I worked at Comcast, and he started the Comcast Cares Twitter handle and we had this great social media effort. And we saw that it did, in many ways, transform the company from the inside out on how we treat customers. We actually started listening more to the customers. We started looking at how do we actually change the company for the better? How do we provide better customer service? And I give a lot of credit to Frank in that.
So if you had to look at that specifically, that you were able to take a much maligned organization and actually turn around the sentiment, what would you say was the lesson you can draw from that? What was the strategy that really did it? What was the thing that really said to people, you know what, I actually do believe that Comcast actually cares?
Yeah. Well, a lot of companies still, on social, specifically on social media channels, they don't respond to people. They don't reply to them and ask how they can help. So if somebody has a complaint, they won't reach out and help because they're not using it in that way as a customer service channel. And I think when you think about a company who needs to improve customer service, and then that opportunity to do that, it really helped the company because people weren't expecting to hear back, and they weren't expecting to hear back within 10 minutes, which was great. And then they weren't expecting to get their problem fixed without even calling on the phone, which normally they would have had to call on the phone. They might have had a tech come out to the house. It might have been this big ordeal, and all of a sudden they can send a tweet and possibly get their issue fixed within 10 minutes.
Was part of it at the time that there was this novelty that you didn't have to call in, that Comcast was actually using the internet essentially to reach out? I mean, has novelty worn off, or does it continue to be, from what you know, a useful tool?
No, it's definitely still a useful tool, and I actually recently did some research to look at what are the top companies and nonprofits doing, and still a lot of them are not responding to customers. They're just not using it in that way, and there's this huge opportunity that if they looked at it and they said, how can we improve customer service? And they started responding and actually started having a team that helped customers on social, that they would see some of those same benefits.
But it must be kind of scary because it's not like you're outsourcing this to somebody in India to handle it by telephone. You yourself are on the front lines. You are actually in this raw position of being connected to people who may have a complaint. How did you handle being exposed like that?
Yeah, well, there are so many different fears involved in putting yourself out there and actually being open to negative feedback. I feel like I had always been waiting for social media channels my entire career. I had a communications background, and I was sending out these press releases a while ago now, it's been years, and they would have this, the news would be in the middle of the press release. I mean, you have this whole lead in, and then you've got the news, then you've got this big disclaimer at the bottom, so you're sending it out to people, having to go through them to get the news out to other people. So when this came along, it was like, we can now talk directly to the customer in a much more informal voice and using plain English instead of having this press release disclaimer info.
And with that previous world that you were part of, it was a very convoluted system where you almost actually had to go through these stages for permission before you could actually reach out to people. Those stages of permission are going away. You no longer have to ask for permission to do this. You obviously like this, but this is kind of hard for organizations to stomach. How do you get them around that?
It's really hard. A lot of times for nonprofits and for companies, it's just showing what's possible, showing the results based on what the goals are. And then oftentimes it's showing what the competition is doing or how we've seen success in other sectors or other businesses.
You alluded a bit to your past as well, that you've always been involved in communications or community organizations your entire career. Why has this been such a focus for you, especially community? What is it about that you love so much?
Yeah, I think there is something special here in Seattle, and there's something special about building community and about figuring out what works to improve our region. I mean, I grew up, my mom's Seattle Parks Commissioner, so I really grew up with it. And I can't imagine not having that, and I just love the communications field, so I think it was just, I didn't excel in science, so.
Well, what's interesting to me from your background is that obviously you've gone to work for for-profits like Nordstrom or Comcast or Fox, but you also do a ton load of stuff in philanthropy. You're on a lot of boards. You seem to, and you're going to be in the social media club as the president. What on earth is driving you to do all this in addition to your day job?
Yeah, well, part of it was just the family growing up, but another part of it was there is a great leadership program here in Seattle called Leadership Tomorrow, and I'm actually on the board right now. And I went through the program in 2008, and I went into the program thinking I want to do more for this community, but I don't know how to help. And it gave me a really great insight to how I can help. I mean, it connected me to a lot of leaders in the region. And after going through something like that, you feel like you have a responsibility to help. Once you know what the challenges are in the region and how we can improve, then you feel like, how can you not step in and help?
Well, that's interesting. So it sounds like regardless of whether you're doing this for a living, you're trying to help somebody make a profit, or you're trying to help somebody just get through life, that you really want to be a positive force. And what's amazing to me is that you've been able to take technology, which seems to be cold and lifeless, and actually giving it that human connection. Were you early to social media?
And I think that's part of it. Once you're early, you sort of have a leg up, right? Because back when I started on Twitter, it felt like a neighborhood.
Yeah.
And now it's a big neighborhood, and it's great because there's much more discussion and so many more things going on. But yeah, I mean, I feel like once you start early, you sort of do have a leg up, right? Because you understand it, and you're in there earlier, and you know who the players are, and yeah.
So why do you like it so much? What is it about social media? Because social media, as we know, was kind of like, people were kind of uncomfortable with it until we began to see examples like Barack Obama being elected thanks to fundraising through social media. All of a sudden people recognized that it had a real institutional value. But you were there early, so there must be something about it that you really feel attracted to.
Yeah, you know, I've just been able to see the power of using social channels to connect with friends of friends of friends. You know, for nonprofits, it's a great way to find board members, to reach out to volunteers. You know, it's just, there's so many great aspects of it, and it's free, pending the resources that you need to actually do it. So I've just been able to see how nonprofits have been able to allocate some of their marketing budget over to think about how can we use social to actually do a more viral connection with the community.
Well, that's interesting because you've done social media for both for-profit and nonprofit organizations. Are there any fundamental differences between the two in terms of how you advise them to use social media?
You know, the general ideas are the same, but when we sit down, and this is something that a lot of companies don't do right, is they just go, oh, we have to do this because it's the hot thing, or we read about it in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. But really sitting down and figuring out what are the goals, like what are you trying to accomplish as a business, and then translating that to social instead of just saying, hey, we're on social, now what do we do here? It seems so simple, but so many times we forget that like the goal should be the same for whatever we're doing as a company, and it shouldn't be different. So really figuring out what are the goals, and then how can we best use the technology. And oftentimes nonprofits' goals are different. You know, we have to think about fundraising. We have to think about reaching the people who we need to reach to actually, you know, getting in front of them, getting their attention, inviting them in to get to know us better so that they will continue to give money.
In fact, you wrote a post, or somebody wrote a post about you in the Huffington Post in the last few years, where you said for nonprofits it should be you should use social media as a friend finder and not for fundraising. What did you mean by that?
You know, it's one thing that I've thought a lot about over the last couple of years is how can we start to be a friend? And is it possible for a brand or a nonprofit to be a friend?
Is it?
And it seems like such an absurd question, right? I mean, on one hand, of course it is, and on the other hand, they can never be there and, you know, your shoulder to cry on if you're having a hard time or whatever it is. But I think that now we have this opportunity with technology to be a friend on a massive scale, whether it's a government official, whether it's a nonprofit or a company. And that just means hiring people and showing that you care about the community, and hopefully you do as a business, and it's not like you're just acting like you do. But the companies who do care a lot about their customers and the nonprofits that care a lot about listening and interacting, it's really apparent, and it comes through, and people start to have this feeling like I would never go to another nonprofit to give, or I would never go to another business to spend my money because I have a connection with you.
Well, I find that really interesting, and especially when it comes to the authenticity. Somebody like you, who's actually a huge influencer on Facebook and Twitter, I mean, your numbers make me look like the kid in high school nobody would sit through in the cafeteria at lunch. You have 27,000 Twitter followers, you know, 3,600 friends on Facebook. It's incredible. With those numbers, though, this is almost broadcast level. Can you truly have an authentic relationship with these people?
That's a great question. I mean, it is, you know, so many people, there's that idea that you can only know 100 people or have relationships with a certain amount of people, whether it's 12 or 15 good friends. But I think that there's this idea of this looser relationship. So we'll follow each other, and you know, maybe once a year or twice a year if you have a problem, or if you love something that I do, you'll reach out. And so we'll have this loose relationship, but we still feel like we know each other, whereas before we didn't even have that relationship.
So you still think that you're able to have those authentic connections? I mean, I'm thinking about somebody like Oprah or Ashton Kutcher, where they have like 1 million followers. I'm not quite sure how many people they're following back, but then we're getting into the fame problem there. Is it that bad for you yet?
Oh, no, no.
But do you aspire to like 1 million followers, or do the numbers actually mean anything to you?
The numbers don't mean anything to me. It's more about, you know, how you're using the relationships that you have. And I think that if I only had 100 connections on Twitter, it would be just as good as me having more than 100. But it's really the connections, and you know, when you put information out there or ideas out there. I mean, I really love to idea cast versus life cast. I really love to talk about ideas, and see people's reaction, see what they have to say. And you know, the great thing about Twitter is it's 140 characters, so you can reply back with a quick thanks, and it takes a second. So
it's very efficient. So coming back to this theme of loyalty, when you do when you are able to make that connection with people, when they say, you know what, I'm going to like what you say on Facebook, or I'm going to follow you on Twitter, is that loyalty?
Yeah, I think that we look at how can we, especially as nonprofits, tap into these deeper passions that people have and make our nonprofit about more than just ourselves. Whether it's ideas, whether it's sharing best practices, whether it's thanking people or celebrating holidays, or just saying, Happy Mother's Day on Mother's Day, just simple things like that. They make a difference. And then above and beyond that, how can you create surprise and delights experiences? So if you do have a problem, how am I helping you solve it, or how is somebody in the company helping you solve it?
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, because it makes me feel really hopeful about social media and how you actually build those connections of loyalty. It sounds to me that it's not as superficial as many people think. So when we return, how did one tiny radio station use the devotion of its fans to transform itself into a beloved independent media powerhouse? The digital revolution has turned communications upside down. It poses challenges and opportunities to professionals seeking to influence and persuade. These are our students in the Master of Communication and Digital Media program, innovators who think entrepreneurially about how to engage communities through storytelling. As creative leaders, together we're charting the future of communication. Want to join us? Find out more at mcdm.uw.edu. As Executive Director of KEXP, Tom Morrow stands atop the peak of entertainment. His influential radio station is in many ways ground zero for our region's thick creative currency, as Tom puts it. How did he transform KEXP into listener-powered radio? Tom, welcome.
Great to be here. Keep up the good work, too.
Oh, thank you. So you've got rabid supporters, right, who around the world, not only do they listen to the station, that they financially support it as well. So what does loyalty mean to you?
We were talking earlier about loyalty being the holy grail for organizations. I think for nonprofits, I think the holy grail is trust. And I think that's, if that is not present, I think you're going to find yourself having twice as much work to do. So as we think about strategy, as we think about vision, trust has to be an organic part of the organization.
Why is that so important, trust itself?
Because that's what compels people to really connect and become even heavier users of your organization.
So nonprofits should not assume that that trusted relationship is there from the outset just because they're a nonprofit.
You've got to earn it. And it's one thing to sort of cast yourself out there, but once you have connections with people, if you're not able to engender trust quickly enough, you're going to have a lot of issues, because our business model hangs on the extent to which entirely we engender loyalty driven by that trust. That's our business model. We're asking people to support us with their contributions for something they don't have to support. They can listen all day long without whether they support us or not.
I find that really interesting, because especially in the kind of communication that we look at in the program that I run, we feel that trust is actually on the decline, because people don't know where to turn to anymore. The institutions are in decline, so we're hearing voices that they haven't normally heard from before. In your career, as you've seen trust to be this incredibly important bond in sustaining the business model, have you seen trust itself change, its nature or its degree change, in how you've been able to sort of harness it?
I think it can live in new ways. I think through the new ways people can engage with our organization, how we can engage with them. So back in the day, single transmitter, you turned on the radio station, you listened, and if you trusted our DJs to select the music for your day or for your life, that's where that connection is made.
I think the way KXP looks at the world, you think a radio station only worries about its listeners.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that you actually have two sets of constituents here. You've got listeners, but you seem to take your artists also very seriously. So when you look at trust, does trust differ in terms of artist versus listener, in terms of how you foster that relationship?
The trust has to permeate throughout, because not only is there trust between the listener and KXP, there also needs to be trust between the listeners of KEXP for even more engagement to occur, for even more usage to occur. And there needs to be trust between KXP and the artist. because we're asking them to do something that's a little unusual. We're asking them, can we record your music?
Because you
And
do a lot
actually,
of that at KXP, right?
That's right. We do about 500 sessions a year with artists. And we ask them to give us the recording that we just made of your music and to distribute it at no charge to others. So there needs to be trust there.
So they want to make sure you're not exploiting them financially and
Precisely.
they're missing out on that.
Once
So
we started that, then the house of cards falls.
Right. So what are you doing then? What is the actual action that you need to undertake to build that trust, whether it's with listeners or artists?
Well, I think it starts with your mission, understanding what your mission is. KXP's mission is to enrich people's lives. We're in the Make Lives Better business, to enrich people's lives by championing music and discovery. And then identify what the vision ought to be. And for us right now, we're spending a lot of time talking about vision because we're planning a move to Seattle Center. And we're really refining the vision for how that new building at Seattle Center is going to generate impact and also engender this trust that we're talking about.
So that means the physical space is going to change, and you still want to see yourself as a very community-centric institution. So you have to think about even how you maintain that openness, even as you're looking at this new location, right?
That's right. So the impact that we generate comes through engagement. You've got to spend time with us. You need to visit us. You need to connect with other artists. There's just all kinds of different engagement, discovery-based engagement, learning-based engagement, sharing-based engagement, trust-building engagement. And if that is not there, then folks are not going to spend much more time with you. They're not going to stick around. And because of that, they lose on the benefit of learning about music that they really should at least try on for size. So trust gets them, once they come to us, trust enables us to generate impact in their life.
So this sounds really great in theory, and it sounds like you're executing on it pretty well. How is it going so far? You say you're listener powered. Is it the success that you hoped it to be based on this?
I think once you understand your mission and understand the value of trust in the organization, then it's about the people that you bring together. And we spend a lot of time not only finding DJs who are knowledgeable about the music, who are also passionate about the music, but also want to put themselves in a role of responsibility of engendering trust with listeners and enabling listeners to discover what we produce. So there is inherent trust. It could be easy for me as the executive director to walk around with a clipboard and tell our morning host, John Richards, what he's going to play tomorrow. But I'm not doing that. What I'm doing instead is I'm relying on John to select the music himself. In other words, the trust and the authority to select the music is actually extended all the way out to the 35, 40 DJs that we have. That's another example of trust.
That sounds incredible. I mean, it sounds like an amazing place to work if you're a DJ who's there because you love the music and you love what you do. When we're speaking about loyalty, it seems to me that you've built incredible loyalty with your employees even.
I think that is critical. I need to trust our staff, our DJs, to play this role in other people's lives. They need to trust me in terms of leadership, the decisions I'm making. Again, if that's not there, boy, you're going to have a lot of issues as an organization.
And when it comes to loyalty, you've actually been there from the beginning. I mean, you were a volunteer for this radio station before it even became KXP, when it was a University of Washington-based radio station. Mm-hmm. And now, even as the executive director, where you're paid a salary to do what you do, I noticed on your signature, I got an email soliciting funds from you today on your mailing list, that you are a platinum member, which means that you actually donate money to the organization that you work for. What does that tell you?
Because that thing is a personal thing. I don't mind talking about it, but again, it's similar to our listeners who really kind of understand and appreciate the work that we do in their lives. It's the same thing for me. I mean, I'm just closer to it, but at the same time, I see a whole bunch of people doing amazing work in terms of music discovery. And that's something for me that I believe in.
So let's look on the other side of the spectrum then. When you do these pledge drives, it sounds like you're almost 100% powered by your listeners, right? It's based entirely on pledges.
Well, it is based all on contributions, and the contributions come from primarily listeners, individuals,
what do you
but
hear
also
from the-
but also from corporate sponsors.
What do you hear from the listeners when you're doing these pledge drives, when they're calling in? Is it, I mean, sometimes, especially on other nonprofit media organizations, I think it's kind of an ordeal when you're listening to it. But it seems to me that your DJs are having fun when they're doing it. What are you hearing from your listeners? Say, "Oh God, not again," or are they actually saying, "Well, I'm so happy to be contributing to this station that I care so much about"?
Well, I think in all honesty, in my view, I think there's two people in the world: those who like pledge drives and those who don't, both inside and outside the
There are
organization.
actually people who actually like pledge drives.
We do, believe it or not. We do take a different approach to the on-air campaigns. We try to be very kind of irreverent, passionate, and we get people calling because of some of the antics, some of the irreverency that we display on the air. But the number one question we get from our listeners is, what is it that you just played? Because our format is wide and deep. There's no playlist at KXP. Again, we're trusting the DJs to select from 1 million songs in our collection. And we need to satisfy that need for discovery. And when you're talking about online media, that's where it can get very fun and also very complicated.
Because you guys have actually been online for a long time. You've been streaming for a while. The playlists are available. You were there before a lot of other radio stations were.
We were an early streamer, and I wouldn't say a pioneering streamer, but with our partnership collaboration with the University of Washington, we did pioneer some technologies. I think we're the first station to provide an uncompressed stream. I think we're the first station to provide a service to the cell phone, things like that, through that collaboration with the university. But when you're talking about a discovery-based mission, when you're a radio station 20 years ago, very easy. Good people, make sure you put the needle on the right song and you call it a day. But nowadays, there's blogging, and there are podcasts, and there are live video streams, and there are exchanges between people, members of the audience. You have no clue is going on.
You mentioned this whole idea of a playlist that's wide and deep. I mean, you contrast that. I mean, I was once loyal to radio stations. I think people used to be loyal to radio stations, but you see things like Clear Channel, where they basically hollowed out the stations, where their DJs aren't even there anymore. It's programmed by one sort of central office somewhere thousands of miles away. Is loyalty still possible with the medium itself? I mean, how are you different from Clear Channel, for example?
Well, I've got to say that it's easier now to sort of differentiate KXP's value in a person's life now than it was, let's say, 20 years ago. Before, I think radio's gone through some transformational change, a lot more efficient modes of distributing music, fewer DJs, et cetera.
Is that DJ really important for that loyal connection?
We hear it every day. We hear it every day. We hear from our listeners saying, thank you for not only playing the music I like, but, and this is one of the comments I just love, I don't like everything you play, John, but I love the fact that you're playing it for me. Because, again, you're actually letting somebody into your life to create the soundtrack for your life. Again, there's that trust.
But that's really interesting, because this is in stark contradiction to what we think is happening to media, and that we have such ability now to pick and choose, because it's all available to us through like Spotify, for example, that we can entirely personalize what we want based on our desires. And you guys are kind of a little bit of old school here. You're actually introducing people through this wonderful serendipity, but it's a bit more top down. It's the DJs who are making these choices. How do you endure or even justify your existence in the Spotify era?
Well, I think there's a different nature between the two. I think with Spotify and Pandora, you're really relying on a system to select music for you. With KXP, you're relying on a human being to actually select that music that you're listening to. I think that's a distinction, and because there's a human being every second of the day, through every second of the year, there's a human being selecting that music on the air. That makes a big difference. You begin to either not like or like that host, and you bring that person into your life, and you trust them to again select the music that you think you need to discover.
So that human connection, that authentic connection, is really what keeps KXP sort of legitimate.
I like to say that that we don't program music, we curate music, and the curating DJ is the center of the universe. And by the way, this is not a new notion. This is the way radio, as you were kind of saying earlier before, the way it used to be. right? Back in the 70s, you trust that DJ to play the music in your life.
It seems to me that you really do see KXP at the center of the community, that it has to be very community-centric, its approach.
It has to be totally community focused. It has to be totally constituency focused. In other words, our constituents are music lovers, people who are curious about music, and musicians. Those are our primary constituents.
How do you balance that with the business needs, though? You're still raising money from these people as well, right? You're still asking them for money even as you're providing that service.
Precisely, because the strategy that we build for every year for our budgets, that support our budgets, have to connect to how we're generating impact in the lives of our listeners and how we're generating impact in the lives of artists and how we're connecting those two together. That's the sort of primary strategy to our sort of way of life at KXP.
Well, I think it's a really interesting strategy, and I think that connection is where we're going to leave it right now, and we're going to come back and talk about that a bit more. So you've heard from Shauna Causey from the Peak of Community and Tom Mara at the Summit of Entertainment. When we return, we'll bridge these peaks. What's the secret sauce for making friends for life? We're back with Shauna Causey from Social Media Club Seattle and Nordstrom, Tom Mara from KXP. Welcome back. So you both have succeeded. You've both represented incredibly powerful brands. You're both here in the Pacific Northwest. Is there something in the water about loyalty and fans and building community around these brands and organizations?
I think it's a question we've been posing for a while. For example, just in our neck of the woods, or the music neck of the woods, we've asked that question for quite a while. And actually, our local PBS station, KCTS, took a nice swing at trying to answer that question recently with a little mini documentary on.
I saw that documentary. It was really great. It was called Something in the Water, wasn't it?
Something in the Water,
Yeah,
precisely.
Yeah.
And I think everybody has their own kind of theory. But I think Seattle is a curious town. I think its people are just curious. And I think one reason why is the presence of higher education, actually. And I think that really drives a city towards asking questions about the world and about life. And I think it also, you end up with people who are curious about making their own lives better.
What do you think about that, Sean? Because I think that's true. I mean, Seattle and Boston are seen as the two most literate, well-educated cities in the country. For better or for worse. I mean, it's sad that the other cities aren't up to that speed, but does that mean that we're an aberration? Do you feel like there's something very special about our town?
I think there's definitely something very special about our town, and I think it's part of our culture, and there's this level of collaboration that I don't see, especially when I go to the Valley or in other places. I just don't see them helping each other out in the way that we do here in Seattle.
And is it just Seattle? I mean, I'd like to think expansively of our region, the Pacific Northwest, Cascadia. I mean, I think Portland's got a lot of this as well. What is it about? Why collaboration? Why here? Is it just the rain?
You know, I think the higher education is a great point. I think that, from traveling around, each city seems to have this culture for different reasons, and I really don't know the reason, but I definitely see it in technology in the startup world here in Seattle.
I mean, and you would like to think that, when New York, I mean, I lived in New York, it's a very competitive place, and in many ways that tension leads to amazing things, and some might say the same thing in Silicon Valley. With that absence of tension, with that ability, there's this sort of notion that we should just all get along and collaborate. Does that serve us well, especially when we're looking at building these powerful brands that are built on loyalty?
Well, I think there's the competitive spirit and there's also the collaborative spirit, right? And I think our community has really proven how it can collaborate quite well. Look at the University of Washington, for example, and it's countless collaborations connected to this institution. And I think there's actually an increasing expectation among our donors to collaborate because, for example, we're working on building a new home at Seattle Center. And in talking with members of the community, artists, donors, there was a strong expectation that we partner because we thought this new home could have a learning strategy to it. But they were quick to say, you don't have to build it yourself. Find others that you can collaborate with, and you'll generate impact that the two organizations otherwise wouldn't be generating. So I think it is a collaborative town.
If that's the case, then, does it really matter whether it's for-profit or non-profit?
I definitely think it does, and I think where it's most exciting oftentimes is the nonprofit world, because you can do things, you can just have such a great impact in a life-changing way. But I see this level of generosity here that I also feel like I don't see in other cities, and I think that that's part of it too.
Is that a luxury? Is it just because we can afford to be generous, because we have Microsoft and Amazon, we're well paid, we're well educated, we're well fed, that we can do this, and this might not necessarily apply to sort of Rust Belt towns where they're trying to figure things out economically?
I think there is a pioneering spirit. I think folks in our neck of the woods really want to make their own lives better. They wanted to enrich their own lives. They want to discover. I think one thing that we've kind of figured out here in the Northwest is education matters, discovery matters, culture matters, and actualization matters.
It's clear to me, like, you've built this incredible institution that's unique. So it means that, even if you got like an incredible offer from somewhere else, another radio station in New York to work with Howard Stern, for example, you would never be able to replicate what you've done here at KXP, so you'd never want to go. In your situation, Shauna, this is collaboration. You are collaboration. You're about community. You're doing social media. You're working with nonprofits. Even at Nordstrom, you're looking at using social media and connection and community there. So how do you go anywhere else?
I always thought I would move, and I really just love this city. I love the people here, and I love the collaborative spirit.
You had the opportunity after you left Comcast. You were consulting with Google. You're spending a lot of time down in the Bay Area. You have job offers there. Why didn't you take them?
Yeah, it was really the people here in Seattle. I do like sunny weather, but really I love the spirit that we have here in Seattle, and that's really why I would never move. It's part of your life, and you have the community, and it's hard to move. What do you think, Tom?
Well, I do know that this is a curious town, and with that curiosity also comes, I think, just increasing expectations from those who we serve. And I think that's a characteristic of our community. It's not just going to to Starbucks to get a cup of coffee. It's the expectations we're placing on Starbucks. I think it's a very challenging. You're doing okay now, but I'm expecting more, and I think that keeps us on our toes. And that's precisely what's not going to get us stuck, because those expectations rising are going to keep us really on our toes.
Well, that's really interesting. So that means that we can still aspire to being excellent without necessarily having to have that competitive edge, and be collaborative and engender that loyalty, but still be good, really, really good, right? And not mediocre.
Once you stop making a difference, then it's time to go somewhere else or do something else.
We're thinking about KXP as a unique institution. Some real loyalty towards retailers like REI, Amazon to a certain extent, but definitely Nordstrom. Is there something unique about our region that has engendered these institutions, these retailers, and the relationship that customers have with them? Or is this something that can be replicated anywhere?
Yeah, I think that I see it a lot in social media, and not necessarily a retailer, but I just was able to help with a project that King 5 did, where we created this news site, and the way that we did it was through a co-creation project. We invited the community in, and we created this news site together. We had a hackathon, which means inviting technology folks in, and coded the whole website and created it in a weekend. They're trying to find this new news model of curation using, powered by social as well as other sites. And it's really, they want to bring in other news sites too. So again, it's that idea of not just using your own site, like it wouldn't just be King 5's news, but they wanted to bring in the West Seattle blog and other local blogs. And I think that project itself, for me, embodied what the city is about. The fact that the #1 TV news station would decide to co-create a project, inviting other people in when they're already doing a great job. And I think that those type of ideas, for me, really stand out as sort of what Seattle's all about.
And does that apply to these retailers as well, the REI, the PCCs, the Nordstroms?
I think, one example that we talk about a lot is Starbucks, and they do a great job with their My Starbucks idea. I am a fan of My Starbucks idea. I think they do a great job of saying, hey, what should we do? And then you can vote on each other's ideas, and we'll look at implementing them into our stores.
So that same ethic that drove this King 5 collaborative project is the same ethic that drives, say, Starbucks' social media strategy then? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think some of the same ideas and principles apply as, now, hey, we can listen to customers in a new way. Let's figure out what they're saying and actually make real change happen inside the company.
You also have to be comfortable with a little bit of lack of control.
Yeah.
And I think that's a new sort of requirement for, I think, today's leadership when it comes to online, culture. You can't control it. So back in the day when we were just a radio station with a transmitter, we select the songs. You guys stay over there. We'll be over here. We'll do our work. Now we've got people who are taking KXP-based content and shipping it to people. We have no idea where they're taking it to.
And you're creating
we have to be comfortable with that. As a matter of fact, we encourage it.
And you're creating incredible content. It's not just the songs that you play, but you create stories, you do documentaries, and that's part and parcel of you being a content creator. And you're absolutely right. I mean, you actually have to be accountable and recognize that there's a transparency and a lack of control over what happens to it afterwards. How comfortable are you with that?
Well, it took a little stretching, actually, because, 10, 11 years ago when we were starting to do a lot of streaming, we started getting, not only requests for, Black Sabbath from Ballard, but also from Indianapolis.
I'd request Black Sabbath. I'm a big Black Sabbath fan. I don't know if that's not cool or not. But.
Black Sabbath rules. Let's all remember that. But also, from Iceland, and that in order to again meet these increasing expectations, feeding them not only photographs and blogs, articles in video. Gone are the days where we could just control who was going to experience that video and where it would end up. Those days are just gone.
Well,
So I think the trick here, as a medium, is to trust your audience sufficiently, so you actually make them agents of change for your mission. So if Bob is listening to Black Sabbath, and Carol has never had the opportunity to hear Black Sabbath, we want to enable Bob be comfortable with doing whatever he thinks it takes to turn her onto Black Sabbath. We're not going to be involved in that. They may pick up some of the things that we've been doing with Black Sabbath, but it's Bob becoming an agent of our mission. He then becomes a representative, an agent of KEXP, and we're not controlling any of that.
And I find this very interesting because at the heart, and you've mentioned this a few times, I think obviously Shauna does it with social media, the changes in the technology, and in your situation, the streaming media. And in fact, you're talking about people requesting from Iceland songs. I mean, are they requesting Icelandic musicians? Who are they requesting?
Oh, this is where it really gets interesting because and we were able to actually travel to Iceland last month. We spent a week there. We captured about 40 live performances to bring back to our audience, but also to bring Seattle artists to Iceland. We're the president of Iceland on our...
Do people want to listen to Seattle artists in Iceland?
You bet. And people in Seattle want to hear artists from Iceland because they're curious, because they want to discover music, and music makes lives better.
I don't think Clear Channel would agree with you. They'd want to put Justin Bieber in the top 10 musicians, and those are sort of that universal harmonic, I don't know what. Yeah. But you're saying that the people actually want those alternatives. They want that diversity.
Oh, they really do. And it's really difficult to keep up with because it's three-dimensional interest, right? It's not just one thing. It's not only the genres of music. It's the artists. It's the countries they're coming out of. There is so much music, and music has so many dimensions to it. And if you're in the business of getting people to discover music, man, is it getting very interesting, very complex. So yes, we do make the effort to pull up our bags and go to Iceland for a week, just so we can get folks to discover music they're not otherwise going to discover.
Shauna, when I think about this, you think that when you want to reach more people, especially when you think about social media, that you need to be as inoffensive and universal as possible in the content and in the voice so you can get as much appeal as possible, especially if you're going beyond your region. And it seems to me that, for example, KEXP has been able to take that sense of place of this region and incorporate that into that brand and make people actually connect in a more loyal way in community building. When you think about reaching out, whether it's with an organization you're working with or a nonprofit, how important is it to that sense of place? Should you go more universal, or should you be very specific in your voice?
I think you can go either way, but what I love about KEXP is what you stand for, and then aside from that, you also, and with music inherently, you stand for so much more than just KEXP too. So I think there's that idea of either if you're niche or if you are more mainstream, how do you tap into those deeper passions and allow fans to celebrate and experience with you as part of it, or how do you help them do it even without your help?
Is that an important lesson then, that any organization that wants to engage in this new system has to know what they stand for first and foremost? Because if they can't really believe in that and have that passion for their own mission, they're not going to convince anybody else of that either.
I think that's exactly it, yeah.
If I could touch on one thing, I think you're right. I think the organization has to understand and embody the values, the key values for that organization. One of them at KXP is all good music deserves to be heard. Well, that's something we care about as an organization. Well, if that's something we care about, then that means we just can't play the hits. That means we got to take on all this work to bring all good music that deserves to be heard to people all over the world. That's a tall order. So authenticity. We were joking earlier that your authenticity has to be authentic. You just can't fake it because people are too smart, especially in our town, where they can quickly sniff out disingenuousness. So your organization has to be very true to mission, very true to the work, very trustworthy. And very authentic.
Sir,
it's a key ingredient to, I think, success in this town.
So Sean, as you're keeping all these offers at bay from all these other places, when you're looking at the organizations that you do want to work for, do you actually look at their mission and feel like, can I have a relationship with this organization? When you looked at Comcast or Nordstrom or Fox, whoever else you work for, is that important to you, that sense of mission and your connection to it?
It is. It's really important, and it really goes back to the company values and what does the company stand for, and thinking about working in a communications field for a company, can you go out there and help that company, and can you feel good about standing for that? I think that's really important.
Do you ever feel like, so you actually want to believe in that company so you can speak authentically about it, right? So
I want to be passionate about the company that I'm helping or the nonprofit that I'm helping.
Have you ever lost that passion for a company where you feel like you had to move on? You don't have to be specific about the company itself.
I haven't. I've always just had the chance to have a new adventure. And I think that that's a great place to be, and I just feel so thankful personally for that. But one thing that I would say that is interesting about Social Media Club Seattle, we've sold out every event now, and we're the strongest chapter. There's chapters all over the world. And the motto is, if you get it, share it. So we have this special thing where people are coming together sharing all of these best practices, and it's really been powerful to see not only that we've sold out all these events and that they're in demand, but that people are coming together sharing all of these ideas, and that's really what it's all about.
Well, that's really interesting. So social media is obviously heavily adopted in this region. There's a passion about, people want to know what those best practices are. Does the fact that we are considered to be a highly technologically savvy region play into our ability to use these tools to create this loyalty and these connections?
Again, it comes back to the pioneering spirit, the curiosity of this town, and I think meeting these rising expectations, it's a great place to be if you're also able to identify opportunities to apply technology in relevant ways. This is an amazing town. And I also would argue that KXP is a Seattle phenomenon.
Could it have been replicated anywhere else, you think?
I think it would have a tough time
doing
that. I don't think exclusively, but I think first of all, there is an incredible flow of creativity in our town. And when we talk about music, our town has never been more creative, has never been more diverse in its creativity. There's never been a greater volume of music coming out of Seattle bands. That's a Seattle thing that we're a part of, that we're fostering, but we're not creating that music creativity. It's organic to our community.
So when you look at maybe the three primary ingredients for KXP and its success, what would they be, and how important was it that you were here for that success to happen?
Well, I think first of all, you need to understand what your mission is, and if you can get people to follow along. First of all, you have to understand it. Number two, you need to know what your values are, and also you need to know your vision. And these are things that are very elementary in, I think, in any sort of MBA class. But you just can't write them down and put them in a shelf. I think the responsibility, you're talking about leadership earlier, I think one of the responsibilities of leadership increasingly is to embody, is to demonstrate, and is to make sure mission, vision, values really permeates the organization. And it takes the leader of the organization that responsibility to help do that. If I don't do that at KXP, you know, who is? That's a responsibility I have. It's not my values. It's not my mission. It's not my it's our organizations, and it's part and parcel of our community.
So if you know that this is, say, a new element of leadership, and you obviously are very involved in leadership, and you're a leader in your own organization, how do you know? How do you measure success? How do you know when you've actually hit the mark? Do we have new access to metrics that allow us to understand that we're succeeding at this?
Well, I like when you were talking, I mean, you're talking about leadership, but really it's servant leadership. You're talking about your community and your employees and how you're serving them. And I think that that's the direct feedback that we look for. It seems like it's very common here in Seattle to look for that. We're not, as leaders, most of the leaders that I know here aren't going around saying, you need to go do this, do it, I don't want to hear from you again. It's more working together and collaborating within companies too, and figuring out how you can serve employees and customers, and then being a leader in that way. And I think that is one of the ways that we measure in Seattle if it's working or not.
Do you actually, when you're looking at using these social media tools, for example, what for you is the great measure of success? When you say you're advising a nonprofit, you're on a board of the nonprofit, and you say, okay, you're going to know it's working when? What do you tell them?
It's pretty simple for me. I am a big believer in looking at engagement levels. So is the content that we're creating mattering to the people that it goes out to? And we look at that, we can tell immediately with social media, which is one of the reasons why I love it so much. If you put out some content, whatever it is, you can tell if people like it, if they reshare it, if they comment on it, if they click through and then add a comment to your blog or your website, or if they reshare your website. Do they make a sale once they click through? There are so many different metrics that you can immediately see. I mean, 10 minutes after you put something out, you can see if it's resonating or not based on your baselines or how much usually is resonating. And then you can look at the competition and see how you're doing compared to them. I think that so engagement is really number one. And then after that, you see, does your community size grow based on the level of engagement? And then what are the other metrics that you're measuring against?
So we've struggled with this question. What difference are we making? Because like a for-profit organization, with its investors, its customers, money is being transacted, coming to the organization. The organization then has an obligation to bring a return back to its community or shareholders. Same thing with KEXP. We're getting resources, funding from the community. And our obligation is not just to bring X number of songs to X number of people, it's to make a difference. It's that impact. Impact is the return.
That's really hard to measure, though, isn't it?
Difficult to measure, and we've been taking a few new swings at it back at the shop. For the first time, we conducted a survey, really asking our listeners, not so much about what you listen to, how much you listen, when, etc., is what difference do we make in your life? And we asked
a metric for that.
Well, the one thing that we did do is ask them, well, to what extent does KXP generate impact in your life? What difference do we make in your life? We found out some really cool stuff. We found out that, among our core listeners, 80% of them think we make a difference in their life and actually help them evolve as a person, as opposed to other people, not KXP listeners, saying that only 30% of them actually think their favorite source, whether it's Pandora or another music station, makes that kind of difference. That's great to know, but now you've got the baseline that you were talking about, and we just can't rest and just roll in the clover all day long after we do some work. This is unceasing. The mission is unceasing. So then we have to figure out strategically, well, how are we going to bring even a greater return to the community, even more impact to the community? And it's an exciting time to be in media because now we have tools to guide us and foster greater understanding of what difference, what the hell does all this make in the community.
So as we look at this very quickly changing landscape where community matters, where the social tools, Facebook and Twitter, does that mean as we're looking at how we engender this engagement, how we measure it, do fans matter more than ever?
We don't care if you're a fan. We care that we make a difference in your life, no matter whatever it takes. That's what we're trying to do. And if you're just thinking in terms of, okay, we're just going to create a fan base and call it good, I think you haven't gone far enough. I think you've got to figure out what difference you're making to that fan base. That's the really, again, sort of the holy grail, this trust, bringing back impact to the community.
Shauna, for you from a nonprofit, especially from a nonprofit point of view, I imagine, how would you qualify this?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that kind of goes back to your book, Hanson, is how do you tell your story and get people to come alongside you in your journey? And I think, so it seems to me that for nonprofits especially, the relevance factor matters. Like, how relevant are you to me, and then like, what does that relationship look like? You know, are you a friend? Is the nonprofit a friend to you, or do you feel like you have some kind of connection to them?
I think this is a good place to leave it. Ultimately, this is not about fundraising, making money, being competitive. It's about collaboration and friend-raising in many ways. So I think we've actually covered it pretty well. So Tom Marr, Shauna Causey, thanks for sharing your lessons on loyalty. We invite you all to extend your reach by connecting with us on Twitter with the hashtag 4PeaksNW. You can also follow me, HRH Media. I'm Hanson Hossein. See you next time for another episode of 4 Peaks.